first.
Oh, good one.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Victor. I am a clinical herbalist based in Toronto and have my private practice here, and I see patients for a variety of different ailments and issues. And I work primarily in the Western herbal tradition, but have some interest in Ayurvedic medicine, and increasingly more and more interested in homeopathy as well. So yeah, I'll just leave it short and move it on.
Okay, Tamara, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi. So I'm Tamara Siegel. I am a registered herbalist working from my farm in Prince Edward County, Ontario. People come to see me here for health consults. I teach classes here and around the area. I lead lots of plant identification walks. I have a particular interest in working with wild plants as medicine. So I do spend a lot of time out in the wild harvesting stuff for my practice, and also a lot of foraging, wild foods, and and that's a lot of the focus of what I teach about when I lead plant walks and such. And so, yeah, glad to be here today.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here too, Tamara. Okay, and my name's Abra Arneson, and I have a practice in Ottawa at a clinic, but I also practice from home via Zoom, and occasionally I see people at my house as well. So I have a full clinical practice where I do lots of I see people about all sorts of different things, all sorts of different kinds of conditions. And I'm also a teacher, so I run a 3-year apprentice program, and I have one space for the 2021 series. I just finished the first draft of a book I'm writing, and yeah, so I'm just letting that kind of ferment for a bit while I work on a few other projects. And yeah, so that's pretty much who I am. And so we always start our webinars with some jokes, and our good friend Penny, who is part of our group here, encourages this. So here's my jokes. And since we're talking about the elements, these are element jokes. So the first thing to remember when you're thinking about the elements is they always occur together. You never get just one element happening on its own. And how they merge really creates different constitutions, different types of plant medicine, different types of landscapes. And so it's sort of like a marriage. So in my marriage, I'm a water sign. My husband's an earth sign. So together we're mud. That was a joke. And I'm actually not a water sign. Tamara's probably going, you're not a water sign. Okay. Yeah. So depending on the mix of elements, they don't always get along so well. Like mud gets along well, right? You can do all sorts of things with mud. Mud's fun to play in. So there used to be this rock band that was trying to form, and they were earth, fire, and ice. So that's earth, fire, and water. But air kept blowing them off, so they never really got together. That was a joke too. Okay, so seriously, you know, the wind element is probably, I love the wind element, and I am a huge fan of wind farms. Oh gosh, okay, so the key for me to understanding the elements is observation of the elements in nature. And so, like, for example, have you ever noticed water walking? It always runs. Okay, that's enough of the bad jokes. I'm not gonna like torture you anymore. They were really bad this time. And I'm gonna pass you over to Victor, and he's gonna lay down some philosophical frameworks for us on looking at the elements.
Okay, great. Thanks for those jokes.
Well, I don't know. I think you got to get a hook and pull me on. Yeah.
Okay, I want to start with a quote. And this is a quote by Yeshe Donden, who used to be the personal physician to the Dalai Lama. And this quote, I think, really serves to orient us around the discussion of the elements. So I'm just going to read that. It says, "Now, without earth, there would be no basis or foundation. Without water, things would not cohere. Without fire, things could not mature or ripen. Without wind, things could not grow and increase. Without space, there would be no opportunity or place for things to grow. You should understand the humors within the context of the five elements. The external environment is composed of the five elements, and the beings inhabiting that environment are also composed of the same five elements. Hence, the structure of the two is the same." And I really like this last line where he draws emphasis to the fact that the external environment is composed of the five elements, and all of the beings that inhabit that environment are also composed of the same five elements. So this is a starting point for thinking about the significance and the importance of elements when we're talking about healing and when we're talking about medicine. And so I mentioned the fifth element, space or ether, which I think we're going to talk a little bit about, and it tends to get sometimes glossed over. So just take note of that. And one other thing I want to say is that in addition to the five elements, there is also, you can say, a sixth component to this, which is the self, the immaterial self, which is also, along with the elements, a fundamental part of our makeup as individual beings. So all of the elements help to comprise our bodies. And let's start with the earth. The earth is represented by solidity and hardness. Water is represented by moisture and fluids. Air, of course, by the breath. Ether, or space, by the intervening space in the body. Or as Robert Svoboda puts it, he says that ether is the field that is simultaneously the source of all matter and the space in which it exists. And the self, we can say, is represented by the indwelling spirit. And so even from what I've said so far, we have an implication from when we're thinking about medicine and healing. We cannot arrive at a holistic understanding of the human being without rooting that understanding in the five elements. If we try to come up with a picture of the human being, of embodied life, without rooting it in the five elements, we're off to the wrong start. Because the elements are what hold us together, and the elements are what relate us to the world that exists seemingly outside of ourselves. And so what I also want to talk about is how it's not only material existence when we're talking about the elements, but also psychical reality. So the mind and the soul. The mind and the soul, the psyche, also rests upon the unshakable ground of the five elements. And there is an eternal interplay, a combination and recombination of the elements that is serving always and forever to give shape to the architecture of reality. And so our bodies are able to function and are able to exist at all because of our ability to process elemental energies. So a few examples: the heart and the nervous system process elemental fire. The digestive system processes earth. The kidneys and the bladder process water. The respiratory system processes air. And we can go on and go through all the different organs and systems in the body and see how the different elements map on. And so it's not just a one element per system kind of picture here. So let's take the digestive system. While the digestive system processes earth, processes material that we ingest, the other elements, of course, play a vitally important role in digestion, in the process of digestion and assimilation. So our digestive capacity is very closely bound up with the element of fire. You know, we often hear discussion of a digestive fire, digestive capacity. They call it Agni in the Ayurvedic tradition. And to give a concrete example here, we can consider how optimal digestion takes place at midday when the sun is at its peak. So the sun is shining its brightest, and at that time our digestive capacity is at its strongest. And so this is a very clear example of the ways in which the microcosm, the elements as they exist in the human being, are also reflected in the macrocosm. And this is not some kind of purely abstract notion. As we can see from this example, this is a daily rhythm. And even paying attention to the rhythms of our body throughout the cycle of a day can teach us a lot about the importance of the elements and understanding our own makeup and our place in the world. The fire element, to keep going with this analogy here, the fire element also plays an essential role when it comes to digesting our sensory impressions, especially our visual impressions. And so this suggests also a kind of deep mythological resonance and association when it comes to the elements. And yeah, so the unity of the microcosm and macrocosm as embodied in elemental reality has given birth to a lot of systems of traditional cosmology. And if we go back and look at Greek and Egyptian cosmology, for example, we see a lot of mythology that's oriented around the idea that the eye that sees is also the source of light. And the eye is often personified, especially in the Egyptian tradition, as a sun god, an eye that creates the world that it shines upon. And we can think of the eye of Ra in the Egyptian mythology, and there's many other examples. And so we have very practical dimensions to thinking about the elements as they are manifested in our physiology. But then from there, we also get cosmology and mythology stemming from that same fundamental reality. Yeah, one more example. This is a more recent example from a great poet, and I couldn't help but share this line. It's from this long poem called Arc by Ronald Johnson. And this is a great poem to understand the elements. It's very much a poem that's about a kind of 20th century cosmology that is very, very tied into thinking about elemental reality. And when he's talking about vision and talking about the eyes, he says, after a long time of light, there began to be eyes, and light began looking with itself. And here we have a beautiful picture of how the element of light or of fire gave birth or created or shaped the organ of the eye so that it can begin to perceive through an individual or microcosmic form. And so lastly, what I want to talk about is understanding the 5 elements in a kind of archetypal sense. So this will be familiar. We often use elemental language to describe people, right? So we describe one person as ethereal, right? Someone who may get lost in fantasies, but also someone who can easily tap into the realms of poetic imagination, who is more receptive to spiritual inspiration, a person who may frequently be perceived as impenetrably mysterious or unpredictable. So that's the ethereal person. Another person we describe as fiery, and these people are eruptive. They're quick to anger, but also they may be quick in the rhythm of their thinking. They may maintain strongly held ideas, controversial opinions. Another person we describe as airy, someone who has her head in the clouds, who doesn't take things too seriously or not seriously enough. But this is also someone who may be lighthearted and is able to maintain a kind of happy and jovial disposition even in the face of adverse circumstances. And we describe another person as earthy, someone who is down to earth, solid, resting on a relatively secure foundation. And this is the kind of person who might be slow to change, someone who is most comfortable with consistency, someone who's dependable and reliable, and may have a kind of solid and robust constitution. And so these qualities, of course, don't exist apart from each other, and we see them all the time in different combinations. So Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychologist, talked about this, and he related what he called the 4 psychological functions of the 4 elements: intuition, thinking, feeling, and sensation. And he said that intuition corresponded to fire, feeling to air, um, intuition, intuition to fire, thinking to air, feeling to water, and sensation to earth. And what Jung revealed with this is that these functions are equiprimordial, which is to say they exist together in an equally fundamental relationship, and they're aspects of our fundamental psychological orientation in the world. And there's no basic structure of the personality beyond these four codependent fulcrums. And Jung pointed out that when we examine a circle, we can see an inherent quaternity, an inherent fourfold division, which is natural to it. There's a fourfoldness that's required for a complete picture, for a comprehensive judgment, and for establishing a fundamental point of orientation when we're thinking about psychology, but when we're also thinking about material reality. And so one brief point that I'll conclude on. So thinking about the four functions, we have a function which ascertains that something is there. That's earth, sensation, deriving a sensation which derives from one or more of the five senses, a capacity to perceive or ascertain that something is there. A second function, which is the feeling sense, the sense that we have whether or not something suits us, whether we wish to accept something or not. And that's water, that's feeling. A third function that helps us to establish what something that we've encountered is. That's air or thinking. And the fourth function, which indicates where that thing came from or where it's going. And that is fire and intuition. So that's just a basic framework, a kind of philosophical framework to show the different dimensions that we can think about the elements in.
Okay, thanks, Victor. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and I want to talk about how the elements, how we can learn about the elements through observing nature. They're always present in, I've spent a long time studying the elements in nature, and they continue to elude me. They're not something that can be fixed easily. It's hard to, you can't just like conceptualize them. They're dynamic principles. So, and they always appear together. But when we're working in herbal medicine and health, we want to know what the balance is of the elements. So with my students, I always ask them to start in their gardens and pay attention to how the balance of the elements in their gardens are. And gardeners, people who work with plants in gardens or in forests, or if you spend a lot of time in a forest or a meadow or on a prairie or on a beach side, you're going to see how the elements are playing out. And you'll see how the plants are relating to the elements that are in that environment. So with the gardener, so gardens are, the foundation is soil, earth element. So as Victor was saying, the foundation of the garden is the earth. So if you have an earth that's too dry, like sand, you're going to add material into the garden, like compost or peat, that can hold some water. So in herbal medicine, when we find a body that's too dry, we're going to add plants that hold water to that body, okay? If you have a soil that's too clay, in other words, it holds on to water, doesn't release water, or it gets really hard and impenetrable, then you're going to add in clay or sand so that there's flow. You're going to dry out that soil. You want to open it up so that there's flow. And so I just have a couple of pictures just to show that, because it's very, once you start looking at the elements in this way. So here you have dry soil and here you have wet soil. Dry soil also is very much engaged with a lot of heat. Heat dries out soil. So deserts are dry places because they have a lot of heat. Their soil is sandy, doesn't hold water. That's simple. And so when you're assessing the body, the first thing a herbalist is going to do is going to decide, well, is this body too hot and too dry and the soil all cracked up? So, and any gardener knows that after a drought, when you start adding water into the soil, it's hard for the soil to grab hold of the water. It just runs off. So that's something that you consider when you're working with the elements in the body. You want to know, okay, how dry is that soil and how hard is it going to be for me to get nutrients into it? And what do I have to add to it to get those nutrients? So this would be classically termed atrophy. This is what herbalists call this condition, atrophy. Whereas this, like, I don't know, I have driven on roads like that and gotten stuck and had to walk out and, go find someone with a bigger truck and pull it out. This is a bog, right? This is like stuck. Earth, remember my joke, earth and water, right? Too much of it, it gets stuck together. And also, you can see that there's not a lot of sun here. The sun seems to be over here, and these are probably tamaracks growing, which like to have nice wet feet. And you'll also know, like if you're wildcrafting or you want to harvest your herbs, you need to know what kind of elemental balance those herbs want and like, because that's where you're going to find them growing. You're not going to find the tamaracks over here. You're going to find them right in here. The other thing is, so these are examples of how the elements are manifesting. And these conditions are very commonly seen in the body as well. So just looking at, so this is an example of a couple of plants. So this plant here, this is the prickly pear. It grows in the desert. It's hot and dry. And this plant holds on to water. It's a very wet plant. It holds on to water. It has this whole relationship with the water element where it grows and it clings to the water because water is so scarce. Whereas this is more like a hardwood forest. And because of the shade, the water doesn't evaporate out of the ground, and they're very moist places. I live in a hardwood forest, and it's very, very wet here, very moist. And the trees are continuously taking earth out of the ground and sending it up to the sky to keep that water balance in place so that the water doesn't just go down there, bog out, and drown these little plants below. And also, I personally believe that trees completely control rain. And so if you want it to rain, go ask your trees, and they'll help bring rain to you. So this is how you see different plants and different landscapes interact with the elements. The thing with the fire element, so I'm going to just stop screen share. The thing with the fire element is a lot of people think of the fire element as hot, but it can also be very cold. So the landscape our bodies are in, the elemental balance that our bodies are in directly reflect the elemental balance in the landscape. So for example, when I was studying herbal medicine, I was on the coast in Vancouver, and Vancouver's a rainforest. So we saw tons of fungal skin infections, fungal infections in groins, fungal infections under breasts, fungal infections under here. Tongues were like white with fungal infections because fungi likes moisture, it's just how it is. And then I was practicing for a long time in Alberta, and I don't think I saw a single fungal infection the whole time I was in Alberta. And what I would find is people from the east or the west, where it's wetter, would come to Alberta, be there for a week or so, and because their body's trying to adjust to the dryness of the landscape, they develop urinary tract infections. And it's like, I haven't had a urinary tract infection for like 20 years. But because their body can't figure out the water balance, it's trying to retain water, leading to urinary tract infections. Also, you could look at, as you change through landscapes, you change the whole bacterial balance of the body, because that's always relating back to the landscape too. But that's a whole nother conversation. So, So for me, I'm very comfortable in this landscape because this is the landscape I grew up in. Whereas my husband, he grew up in the prairie, and when he first came east and was living in this damp, moist environment, he said, I feel like I'm growing like mold on me. It's so wet. And that's simply his body was not used to that. And like he will go out and sun himself on rocks just to dry out his body, because that's what his body was used to, a really dry prairie climate. So when herbalists are looking at a body, they're always trying to figure out what the water, fire, earth, and air element is. So one of the things I think about the air element is about movement. Yeah, that's one of the main principles of the air element is movement. And movement is essential for life. If you don't move, your life is not very good quality. And just as like breathing is all about movement, there's nothing stagnant in breathing. If you're holding your breath, you know, you're probably going into trauma, right? Or your trauma is coming back up, like something that's stuck and fixed in the psyche. But also, so for me, I watch the air element is also an element that brings newness in and takes the old away. And so when I'm working with people and they have chronic illness and they haven't been walking, they haven't had any energy to move, or it's been too painful to move, and they tell me they've started to go for walks, then I'm like, oh, the health is coming in. Movement is one of the first signs of health, the renewal of the air element. And this weekend, there's this storm on the eastern seaboard. And so we've been in the tail end of that, like the far outer reaches. A lot of rain this weekend. And on Sunday, the rain stopped and the air was absolutely magnificent. It was like breathing nectar. And I just was like, yeah, you know, that storm, it blew out all that stuff and it's brought in all this new air. And with all that rain, it's like everything's been renewed. It's like, oh my God, we're moving into spring again with this renewal of this beautiful fresh air and this beautiful rain that we've had. So it's just, and also a new crop of mosquitoes, but that's besides the point. So yeah, what I really encourage people to do if they want to really understand plant medicine and understand how to use plant medicine in the body, because herbal medicine isn't just about the plants, it's about the plants' interaction with the body, is go out, watch nature, look at different landscapes, see what's happening, who grows where, how are they dealing with the elemental balance. For example, just one more example, and then I'll pass over to Tamara. Yarrow is a great plant. It's grown anywhere I've lived, and I don't have yarrow in my garden here because it's, in my mind, it's a waste of time to grow. I used to have yarrow in another garden, and it was absolutely useless medicine. It had no scent. It was tall. The flowers, the umbrella was too loose. There was nothing in that plant, and it wasn't working hard with the elements. The elements were all nice and balanced in the garden. You know, I made sure there was enough water. The soil I worked on all the time. I had it in a nice place where it had some sun, you know. And so I went down when I was in Alberta. I went down to the Badlands, and the Badlands, even though it's a climate that's extremes with extreme cold, there's cacti growing down there. So it's desert. And the yarrow in the desert down in the Badlands was just like the best medicine you could possibly find, because yarrow has that whole affinity with air and fire, and it's just like boom, it was really intense. Yeah, and I just want to pull out one more example. Years ago, I was working with a woman who's an Inuit, and she had to come down, and she was in menopause, right? So I said to her, you know, are you sweating? Question you would ask a woman in menopause, what's the sweats like? And she says, oh, Inuit people don't have sweat glands. And I said, what? And she said, no, you know, our ancestors, if we sweat out on the tundra when we were walking across the tundra, like we would die. Our bodies are built to conserve heat, not to throw off heat, which is what we're doing when we're sweating. The water element is carrying the heat out of the body. And so here it is, the human body has adapted to an elemental balance of extreme cold by learning to conserve the heat through elimination of sweat glands. So yeah, that's just a few of my observations around the elements and that relationship between the body and the landscape and then the plants. And the elements is really the basic language between those three components. The body, well, actually the body, the mind, the plant, and the terrain that one lives in, the environment one lives in. So, Tamara, now you get to learn about plants.
Thanks, Abra. And thanks, Victor, as well. So yeah, we are sort of, I guess, moving from this, you know, looking at the perspective of the elements from, you know, a more philosophical and maybe a more ethereal way that is kind of up here, and moving down to a bit more, you know, in our day-to-day, what we observe in the nature around us, and then I'm going to hone it in a little more and focus specifically on the plants. But because I'm following what both of you just said, I feel inclined to also just give a little bit of a reference to the way that I perceive the elements, and I actually teach about herbs and elements quite a bit, like the association between them, and I find that it's useful in sharing ideas about it to actually I don't have images here, but to if you can picture, they're very simple, the alchemical images for the four of the elements. So the alchemical image for the fire element is a triangle. It's just an upright triangle. Mm-hmm. And in that, you see that the base is wider and it's moving up to a narrow point. It's like a campfire, right? You got the wood at the bottom and it's heavy, and then it's moving up and everything is moving up. The heat is rising and the smoke is rising and it's dispersing. And it is the most dispersive, the fastest moving, and least stagnant of all the elements. It moves really, really fast. And then the symbol for the air element is also a triangle, but there's a line that goes, so you've got your triangle and then there's a line that comes across the top of it. So if you think about like mountaintops with clouds that cut off the top of the mountain, you know, that kind of image, triangle with a line. The line is indicating that the air element is moving upwards as well. The arrow, the point on the triangle is upwards, but it's not moving up and out quite as quickly as the fire element. So the line is kind of holding it down a little bit. So the fire element and the air element both have this upward motion, and they both are moving. They're all, as Abra was saying, you know, air is all about movement. Fire is really about movement too, about transforming one thing into another, like a hunk of wood into smoke and a whole bunch of ash, right? So, and in that sense, you know, Victor was talking about fire associated with the digestion. I think about the fire element being associated with digestion because our digestive system is like a fire, breaking down the solid food that we take in and then turning it into all these different micronutrients that get absorbed into our blood or get carried out. So it really is about transformation. Then we have the water element. So the water element is an upside down triangle. And so I often think about water going down the drain, right? The water element is about downward movement. Water falls, water's going down drain. It runs downwards. It's got more gravity. It's heavy to carry water. It's got more substance. It's not moving up and dispersing, it's gathering. And what do we need in order to grow our gardens? Water, right? We've got earth, but if the earth that we have is dry, then even if there's lots of nutrients in that soil, the plants can't get those nutrients. We need water moving down into those roots, allowing them to take up the nutrients. And I and anyone on here who's living around where I am here in Prince Edward County, we have the lake effect. We're an island in Lake Ontario, and though it's been raining all around, we've hardly gotten any, and we are in a drought. So we know about this right now, this idea that if you're trying to grow a garden, you need water more than what we're getting from the sky right now. So and then we have the earth element, and the earth element is an upside down triangle, but it's got a line going across the base. So with the air element, it's going upwards and the line's like this, and with the earth element, it's going downwards, the point is downwards, and then there's a line coming across the point at the base there. And that's indicating that it is that much more dense. It's weighing it down. That line is weighing it down even more. The earth element is the most dense. It is the slowest moving, and so the slowest to change. And it is about solidity, and it's about all the stuff that makes up our bodies and the foods that we eat and all the substance that we have. And then of course we have the ether, the space in between everything that ties it all together. And sometimes I've seen actually all those triangles put together, which would make a 6-pointed star and could indicate the sign for ether. And ether also I've heard being compared to the alchemist, the person, but not necessarily the person, the one who influences the change, the interaction between all the elements. So now getting back to this idea of the garden, and like I was saying, where I'm living here, it's really dry. I've been paying attention to a lot of the plants that are doing okay in the dryness, because I've had to sacrifice plants in my gardens, and even some of the wild plants that I like to harvest this year, they're not thriving, all of them. They're getting attacked by a lot of bugs, and they are drying up and becoming crunchy, and the trees are getting thirsty. And we did get some rain, thank you for that, but we could use more. So if anybody has the power to send rain our way, you know, please send it over. Anyways, so in the dryness, I'm looking at, you know, which plants are thriving. And I am interested in that because I'm interested in the plants, but also because I'm working with the plants as medicine, and I want to see which plants can thrive when the soil is dry and they can still get what they need. And those are going to be plants that are going to carry generally a lot more aspects of fire element, and also probably air element, because those are the drier elements, the upward, airy, moving elements, you know, and they make everything, like when the plants dry up, they get light and wispy, and then they crumble away, right? It's all light, versus when they're full of rain, they become thick and heavy and dense and full of substance. So which plants thrive? Well, one of the plants that always does pretty well in the hot summers, hot, dry summers that we have here is thyme. And so thyme is, it's able to thrive in the dryness because it has these tiny little leaves, teeny tiny little pin-like leaves. So very little leaf matter to fill with water. It's able to provide itself with nourishment with just this, you know, this small amount of leaf matter. It also, I think of it also as resonating with the air element because it's very aromatic. So we all know thyme is a spice, and you crush the thyme and it's got a very strong, lovely aroma. And any plants that are aromatic are going to resonate with the air element, first of all, because when they get broken and their aroma gets released, it gets released into the air and we breathe it in. That's how we detect it. So we have this association between the air element and aromatic plants. And plants that have aroma, if they are medicine, if they're herbs that we use, then that medicine, a lot of the medicine that they have is going to be present in the aroma. It's going to be in their volatile oils, their essential oils that are getting released into the air. And those oils are they're often very effective medicine in various ways. They're often very antimicrobial. They'll kill off microbes. They also, they have all, depending on the plant, they have all sorts of different effects, but generally their effect is going to happen really quickly. Like, as soon as you smell, like you can distill some, or not just, like have some essential oil burning in your space. And when you smell it, when you walk into a space that's got essential oil burning, it affects you right away. Like the smell of it affects you right away. Traditionally, ceremonially, incense has been burned to help cleanse and transform a space and transform the people in it, so that they release certain things that they're coming from out of in their life and move into this ceremonial space. And it happens very quickly. We can take these herbs internally, and they're going to have an effect very quickly on our body. So with thyme, for example, thyme is a really wonderful expectorant. It's like a tremendous expectorant. It will get you coughing if you have if there's like stuckness in your lungs. And if you have asthma and there's mucus stuck in there, it will really help to move it out by getting you to cough and carry it out. And so I've seen thyme, the tincture of thyme, or even just the fresh plant of thyme, help people that are like struggling with got something stuck in their lungs, like an asthma attack, just taking a little bit and then getting them coughing very, very quickly, like it allowing stuff to move out really quickly. And it's wonderful in all kinds of coughs where it's stuck. And if there's infection and it's stuck in there and you need to move it out, you can use thyme to help it do that. Also, the aroma and the flavor of thyme is spicy. So then we get a sense that it's a bit hot, and it's carrying the fire element as well. And with any aromatic plants, generally speaking, when the weather's really, really hot, their aromas are going to be that much more prevalent in the plants. That's really when they're full of all their essential oils. When the weather cools down in the fall, the plants might still be alive, but they don't have the same extent of aroma. And so the fire element is bringing out the aromatics, and the aromatic, these volatile oils are all about moving up into the air and moving through the air, and then they disappear. And so we sense this particularly with thyme, where it's got these volatile oils and they're fiery. And the fire element is always going to transform stuff. It's got this kind of aggressive and a bit of a fighting spirit. So if you've got an infection, let's say in your lungs, again, you're taking thyme, it will help to right away help kill off some of those microbes and support your body in fighting it off. So you've got the fire element showing up there too. And if it's a very wet cough, if it's a really cold and wet kind of drippy cough, the thyme's going to help to dry it up, because it's got all this air and fire element in it. So it's offering the opposite, to help bring your body into balance. So, and we see that in the garden, it's responding to the elements and bringing out these aspects on its own. There was one other plant that I wanted to talk about in terms of the elements, to kind of show how we can sometimes see different elements all within one plant. And so the other plant I wanted to mention was burdock. I've been thinking a lot about burdock lately, and burdock is a wild plant. For those of you who don't know burdock, it's the plant that makes the burrs that stick to you when you're going out for a walk in the fall. So there's burdock, and it's got, on this plant, it's got the burrs, they're in flower, so they haven't matured and they haven't made, the burrs are the seeds and they're not ready yet. It's just got little purple flowers on the ends of those little burr balls, and then they'll dry up and they'll become really, really sticky. So the burdock plant, this is the burdock plant in its second year of life. It's a biennial plant. In its first year, it doesn't make these flowers. It just has the big leaves on the ground that kind of look like rhubarb, but they're not rhubarb. And they just come right up out of the root. And then in the second year, it gets these flowering stalks and the burrs. So the burdock plant, I generally have tended to associate primarily with the earth element. And the reason is because in medicine and also in food, we use burdock. We use the root of burdock. And it's got a crazy deep root. You can harvest it from the wild, but good luck. You really need to dig deep, 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 deep in the earth in order to get that burdock root out of the soil. It is a super long, deep taproot. And so it is really rooted in the earth. And that root is actually very edible and delicious and full of lots of trace minerals that it pulls up from the soil, lots of iron and lots of other trace minerals. And it's substantial. It's really nourishing. And it's very dense and it keeps really well. It stores fairly well. So you can harvest burdock root in the fall and store it over the winter to eat as a really good, nutritious, immune boosting, nourishing food. And so nourishing stuff, foods that are dense and they're full of minerals which build the structures of the body. This is earth element embodied, and so in that sense, I really think of burdock as supporting as resonating with the earth element. Also, the earth element has to do with not just like substance, but also stickiness, because substance is made from stuff sticking together, right? Molecules stick to each other and more of them stick to each other and more of them stick to each other, and you get a thing, more of a thing. They split apart, like with heat and fire, and you get space. Or they come together and they cling to each other and you have substance, and that's earth. So so the aspect of stickiness in our food, we can think about with oils and fats. They're sticky, right? Like if you pour oil onto your potato salad and then you put salt on, the salt will stick to the oil in the potato salad, more easily than if you don't pour the oil. So oil kind of has this sticky aspect and slow moving. And burdock works a lot with oils and fats in the body. It helps the body to properly metabolize oils so that we can make use of them in healthy ways and not have them clogging up our system, which is the other thing that happens with oils, right? We have too many fats and oils, our blood vessels get clogged, we get clogged. So burdock helps to ensure that doesn't happen, and at the same time helps to ensure that we get good fats and oils. And we see the sticky nature of it, the earthly nature of it, also in those burrs, which stick to everything. You go for a walk and stick to your clothes. They want to build more substance. They want to stick to you and build more substance. So we see that aspect there as well. Burdock also is a really cleansing plant. And in that sense, I think of it as relating to the water element. It really helps to cleanse lymph nodes. It really helps to cleanse the liver. It has some laxative properties, mild. So it helps to get the body in order if you've got stuff stuck that needs to move. When you have too much earth element, it's stuck, you need movement, right? So it helps to stimulate that as well. And in that sense, it resonates with the water. When it goes to seed, those burrs, like within the burrs, when you pull them off, the seeds will disperse themselves through the air, and it's got this air element aspect. It's also, burdock is in the aster family, and aster plants are, it's a huge family, but the aster plants, the ones that people know of, are like sunflowers, dandelions, chamomile, calendula, daisies, all these plants that have, a whole bunch of little petals. The burdock has the same thing, a whole bunch of tiny little petals, which are actually each individual flowers. So the aster family, their characteristic of it is that the flower head has hundreds of flowers on it. And then when it goes to seed, it disperses all of them. So it looks like one flower, the flower head, but it's actually hundreds of. On a sunflower plant, like you get hundreds of seeds on one plant because each of the little petals on the plant made one seed, and it was actually one flower head had hundreds of flowers. So that's the aster family. Aster, the term, relates to stars. Aster has this sense of this connection with stars and astral plane. So because the seeds disperse themselves out everywhere, it's a very dispersive kind of thing. So in that sense, it kind of relates to the air element. And burdock root really, really helps to support the digestion. It is a brilliant digestive herb. Because it works primarily on the liver, and because it has a little bit of a bitter flavor, and any herbs that have a bitter flavor are going to support our ability to digest food and absorb nutrients and clear out waste in a timely manner. That's the work of the fire element. So burdock is also really helpful in breaking stuff down and transforming stuff and making it useful for the body in different ways, and helping us to get rid of what we no longer need, and doing that in a timely manner. So there we see the example of the fire element. And again, how does the plant know what to do? How is it going to work within any particular body? Well, that's where the alchemist comes in, right? That's where the ethereal aspect comes in, because the plants have their own intelligence, and they're organic beings. And when we take them into our own organic beings, they engage with us. And sometimes they will find a resonance in a particular part of us, and they will know exactly what to do in order to help things be brought into balance. Not to say that, you can just do this with any plant. Obviously, we have certain plants that work for certain things and such. But burdock is a plant that is both a food and a medicine, and it's multifaceted. And it has been shown to be helpful in so many different cases. And I would venture to say that I don't know that it's that well understood in herbalism, even though it is very commonly used, because it's reliable, even though it's not fully understood how it works. And so perhaps there we've got like the ethereal being at work within the burdock. So, I just wanted to go through that to give a bit of an overview, and maybe help get all of us thinking a little bit more about how different herbs might resonate with different elements, and how the ecology in our body is always manifesting with different balances of different elements, and it's an ongoing dance. It doesn't end, right? As I think Victor was alluding to at the beginning. So we keep working with it, and we keep learning about it, and so I hope that you find that interesting and you keep learning about it too.
Okay, great. Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Tamara. Okay, so does anyone have any questions or concerns or observations that you have about the elements? You're welcome to put them into the chat, and we'll try to get to them. I was just going to talk a little bit about how you can see how the elements are manifesting in your body. And there's a lot of ways to look at it. Like your skin will tell you a lot about how the elements are manifesting, whether your skin's dry or moist or red, or your fingers turn blue, that kind of thing. But I use a lot about the tongue to assess the elemental balance in the body. So if the tongue has cracks in it, that's suggesting that there's a lack of moisture in the body, that there's dryness. You can get a little more deeper into this and look at where the organs are mapped out on the tongue, but you can see dryness by cracks. If a tongue is swollen and they have scalloped edges, usually that tongue is holding on to moisture. If a tongue is red, there's a lot of fire element. You can have everything from what's called a strawberry tongue that's really red to just sort of a little bit more pink or red dots on the tongue. That's suggesting that there's an imbalance in the fire element in terms of heat. The other side of that is you can have a pale lavender tongue. It's called a lavender tongue, or I've even seen like almost gray tongues, and that's like cold, a lack of fire element in the body. Yeah, so that's basically like, or if a tongue's wiggling a lot, there's a lot of movement in the tongue, that's suggesting that there's a lot of air element in the tongue. So air, earth. Oh, and sometimes you'll see a very thin tongue. Yeah, there's certain conditions that bring out a thin tongue, and often those people are malnourished, or they have a condition that's causing their body not to be able to absorb nutrient. So that's like a lack of earth element in the body. Yeah, it's so you can use the tongue to easily assess where that imbalance in the elements are in the body. And if you study how soil reacts to the different elements, you'll see that mapped out on the tongue fairly. It's not that hard of an intuitive leap to go from that to the tongue. Yeah. And also, just one thing I want to add about the digestive system is the water element is really important in the digestive system, because it's with the water element that the food's cooked, right? So if we don't have the water element and we have all this fire element, you get heartburn, ulcers, all that, right? So the water element controls the fire element in the digestion, and it also is the substance that the food is cooked in, and then it is the water element that carries the nutrients into the body, just as a river carries, when the river floods and carries the nutrients out into the landscape. It's the same principle. And without the water element in the liver, in the digestion, the fire is too much. But if you have too much water element in the digestive system, then you have no fire, and a lot of bloating and anyways, a lot of problems there. So yeah, that's just some ideas about the elements. So
yeah, it
I
relates
think that's
I think that's a direct relationship with the the water feeding the soil and feeding the plants. If the soil's dry, the plants can't get nutrients. If you're too dry and you eat lots of good foods, you still might not absorb them properly if you don't have enough fluid.
Yeah, so a herbalist would use plants that are would moisten the GI tract. And there's lots of really simple ones, like plantain is a really great one, marshmallow leaf, If it's really hot, you might use some chickweed, So yeah, and also when you are burdock would be another one you could use to moisten the digestive tract. When you're shifting elements, though, you don't go fast. You go carefully and slowly, because the body has to adjust to landscape. It's like those people that would go from the West Coast to the dry prairie and get a bladder infection because the shift in the elements was too fast and the body couldn't keep up with it. So when you're shifting from a dry environment to a moist environment, you work gently and carefully. You don't just all of a sudden start downing, a whole pile of avocados and yogurt and that kind of stuff. You slowly, it's just the same thing as you're adding fire. You always add fire very carefully. Yeah. So anything else, Victor? Anything to add?
We can go on indefinitely talking about that.
I know, it's true.
Yeah,
it's true.
just a very quick, I make a quick comment on time. So one thing about time that I notice is that, obviously, as was said, it requires very little from the soil. It needs hardly any water. And you can almost say it feeds on cosmic light and warmth. And you can see that the leaves are contracted almost to a kind of needle point. And the leaves themselves are striving upwards. In anthroposophy, the tradition stemming from Rudolf Steiner's work, there's a lot of discussion of the warmth organization, which is very much bound up with the ego, the bodily ego. And when the warmth organization doesn't fully permeate the stomach, doesn't fully permeate the lungs, then we have a tendency to develop colds, and we have a tendency for a region to be holding too much water and not enough warmth. And so this is where the cosmic warmth that time possesses can come in and help to bring the warmth organization back to that part of the body. On the other hand, if we have a condition like an overactive thyroid, for example, where there's an excess of metabolic stimulation, then we don't want to be using time, because the fiery element is too much and it's pushing things too far. It's the wrong kind of action. So yeah, and just on the note on this warmth element and how it relates to the ego, just think about how uncomfortable it is to feel cold, right? And we feel cold in our bodies. It's very difficult for us to function well physically and mentally. And so when the warmth element is underactive or not functioning as it should, We also have an issue with the dimension of the soul and the spirit, because these things too need a sufficient warmth in order for them to work to mold and remold the body. And we can talk about, these elements with respect to any plant, because they're contained in every possible example that you can come across, even plants that we won't be using medicinally in a clinical practice.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, it was interesting to see the little flame-shaped leaves, in terms of the signature of the fire element. Yeah, so, okay, so I think that's most of what we had to share this evening. So we thank you all for coming. I think our next webinar is in 2 weeks. I should have checked to see what the topic was. Anyone have any idea?
Goldenrod.
Oh, it's goldenrod. It's Penny and Tamara talking about goldenrod, a specific plant. And yeah, so that will be wonderful. And tune in for it. Watch it. Will be announced on our Facebook page, Herbalists and Herbs. And yeah, I hope you learned lots and we inspired you to get to know your plants in a different way, using a different language. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Yeah,
Bye.
sweet dreams.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, thank you.